The alien ship looked like nothing Jake Morrison had ever seen before. And that was saying something since he had been flying experimental spacecraft for 15 years now, but this thing was huge and smooth and seemed to be made of some kind of metal that changed colors as he watched it through the viewport of his ship called New Horizon, which was held together with spare parts and hope more than anything else, but it had gotten them here to this place far from Earth where the aliens had told them to come. Jake turned to look at his crew and saw the same mix of fear and excitement on their faces that he felt in his own chest, because this was it after all the years of wondering. If humans were alone in the universe, they were about to meet beings from another world and find out what that meant for everyone back home on Earth, where people were still fighting wars over land and resources, while out here there were entire civilizations that had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. Lisa Grant was checking her equipment for the 10th time since they had arrived, and Jake knew. She was nervous because she always fiddled with tools when she was worried about something, but Lisa was the best engineer he had ever worked with, and if anyone could figure out how alien technology worked, it would be her, even though right now she looked like she might throw up all over her control panel. Ben Hughes was staring at the navigation display and shaking his head slowly because the readings made no sense according to everything humans knew about physics, but here they were in a place that should not exist, talking to beings that should not be possible, while their own ship somehow managed to keep working despite being built from parts that 3 different governments had thrown away, as useless Amy Collins had her headset on and was listening to the alien voices that came through their communication system in sounds that no human throat could make, but somehow the translation device they had been given was turning those sounds into words that almost made sense, even though some of the concepts were so strange that Amy had to keep asking for clarification. The alien who called himself Ambassador Zekthara appeared on their main screen, and Jake had to admit the creature was impressive in a terrifying way, with skin that looked like polished stone and eyes that seemed to see right through him as if he was made of glass. But the alien spoke in a voice that sounded almost bored as he explained what would happen next. Humans would be given permission to mine rocks on 3 small asteroids that nobody else wanted, and in return they could trade the materials they found for basic technology that would help them survive in space, but they would not be allowed to travel freely or build weapons or do anything that might threaten the established order of things in this part of the galaxy. Jake listened to the rules and restrictions and felt his jaw clench because it sounded exactly like every other time in human history, when powerful people had decided what weaker people were allowed to do. But he kept his face neutral and nodded in all the right places, while inside his head he was already thinking about how to get around every single limitation the aliens were trying to impose. The meeting continued for hours as Ambassador Zekthara explained the galactic government and how new species were expected to behave and what would happen to them if they caused trouble. And through it all, Jake smiled and asked polite questions while Amy recorded everything, and Lisa took detailed notes about the technology they were being shown, and Ben memorized the star charts they were given access to. When the meeting finally ended and the humans were escorted to their assigned quarters, Jake gathered his crew together and made sure their room was secure before he spoke in a voice so quiet they had to lean in close to hear him, because he knew the aliens were probably listening to everything they said. The plan had worked perfectly, and the aliens thought humans were just another primitive species that could be easily controlled and managed like all the others who had come before them. But what the aliens did not know was that Jake Morrison and his crew were not just explorers. They were intelligence officers working for Earth's military, and everything they had seen and heard was being transmitted back home, where much smarter people than him were already figuring out how to turn the situation to humanity's advantage. Jake looked at each member of his crew and saw the same determination in their eyes that he felt burning in his own chest, because they all knew this was just the beginning, and the aliens who thought they were so superior were about to learn that humans had not survived every disaster their planet could throw at them by being weak or stupid or easy to control. The real test would come later, when the aliens realized that humanity was not going to follow their rules or accept their limitations or be satisfied with scraps from their table, because humans had come to the stars not to serve but to thrive, and They would do whatever it took to make sure their species had a future among the stars, even if it meant taking on the entire galaxy to get it. 6 months had passed since the first meeting with the aliens, and to anyone watching from the outside, it looked like humanity was doing exactly what they were supposed to do, which was mine rocks and trade materials and ask permission for everything. Like good little children who knew their place in the galaxy, but appearances could be very deceiving, especially when humans were involved. Helen Carter sat in the observer section of the Galactic Council chambers and listened to the alien representatives discuss trade routes and territory disputes and resource allocation as if humans were not even in the room, which was fine with her because it meant they were not paying attention to what humans were actually doing while they talked the human mining. Operation on asteroid designated XK7 was running smoothly and producing steady amounts of rare metals that the aliens seemed to value highly, and in return humans received basic technology and supplies that helped them survive in the harsh environment of space. But what the aliens did not see was the second operation running parallel to the official one. Captain Jake Morrison had spent the last 6 months learning everything he could about alien technology and society and military capabilities. And he had discovered that the galaxy was not nearly as unified or peaceful as the Council liked to pretend, because there were dozens of different species with conflicting interests and old grudges and territorial disputes that could explode into war at any moment. Dr. Kevin Walsh had set up his research facility in an abandoned section of the asteroid mine, where he worked 18 hours a day taking apart every piece of alien equipment he could get his hands on and putting it back together in ways that made it work better than the original designers had intended, which was not as hard as it should have been because most alien species seem to have stopped innovating centuries ago. Janet Kim was the real genius behind the operation because she had figured out how to crack the alien computer systems without them knowing about it, and what she found there was both fascinating and disturbing because every alien species was spying on every other alien species and gathering intelligence and planning for conflicts that might happen decades in the future. The breakthrough came when Janet discovered that the translation device humans had been given was not just helping them understand alien languages, but was also sending detailed information about human psychology and capabilities and weaknesses back to something called the Council Intelligence Division, which meant humans had been under surveillance from the very first day. But Janet was smarter than the aliens who had built the translation system, and she figured out how to reverse the data flow so that instead of the aliens learning about humans, the humans could learn about aliens, and what they found out changed everything, because the galaxy was not run by wise, peaceful leaders, but by politicians and bureaucrats and military commanders who were just as petty and short-sighted as their human counterparts back on Earth. Things were happening that would have terrified the aliens if they had known about them, because Admiral Scott Parker was overseeing the construction of a fleet that incorporated everything humans had learned about alien technology, but improved it in ways that the aliens had never thought of, because humans approached problems differently than any other species in the galaxy. The shipyards hidden behind Jupiter's moons were working around the clock, building vessels that looked like standard human designs from the outside, but contained hybrid systems that combined human engineering with alien technology in ways that created capabilities far beyond what either approach could achieve alone, because humans had always been good at taking existing ideas and making them better. Helen Carter continued to play her role as the naive diplomat who was grateful for any scraps the Council was willing to throw to humanity, and she asked all the right questions about trade agreements and mining quotas, while secretly recording every conversation and mapping every relationship and identifying every weakness in the galactic power structure. Dr. Walsh made his biggest discovery when he realized that alien technology was not actually superior to human technology in most ways, but was simply more advanced because they had been developing it for thousands of years longer. But humans had already caught up in many areas and were starting to surpass alien capabilities in others, especially when it came to computer systems and artificial intelligence. The aliens seemed to have an almost superstitious fear of creating machines that could think for themselves, which meant their technology was limited by the need for constant manual control, while humans were already building automated systems that could make decisions and adapt to changing conditions without any input from their creators. Jake Morrison felt a grim satisfaction as he watched the alien ships patrol the mining area because they thought they were keeping an eye on a primitive species that might cause trouble if left unsupervised, but they had no idea that every patrol route and every ship design and every weapon system was being analyzed and cataloged and incorporated into human strategic planning. The real irony was that the aliens were so convinced of their own superiority that they never bothered to hide their capabilities or protect their secrets. Because who would a primitive species like humanity share that information with? And even if humans did figure out how something worked, what could they possibly do with that knowledge, since they were restricted to 3 asteroids and a handful of basic ships? But humans had never been good at accepting restrictions, especially when those restrictions were imposed by people who underestimated them. And as the months passed and the intelligence flowed back to Earth and the hidden shipyards continued their work, it became clear that the galaxy was about to learn a very important lesson about what happened when you gave humans just enough rope to either hang themselves or climb out of the hole you had put them in. Admiral Parker sent a coded message to Jake Morrison that simply said the word ready, and Jake smiled because he knew that everything was about to change. And the aliens who thought they had humanity under control were about to discover that they had made the biggest mistake in galactic history by assuming that a species capable of surviving on a planet like Earth would be content to accept the limitations that more civilized beings tried to impose on them. High Commander Vexahal of the Zelkari hegemony was tired of waiting for the humans to fall in line with proper galactic protocol and had decided that a show of force was exactly what these primitive creatures needed to understand their place in the cosmic order of things, which was at the bottom, serving their betters without question or complaint. Like every other species that had been brought into galactic civilization, the human mining operation had been running for 8 months now. And while they were producing the required materials and following most of the rules, there was something about their behavior that made Vexahal suspicious, because they asked too many questions and seemed too interested in things that should not concern a species that was barely capable of space travel. Vexahal had commanded military operations for over 200 years and had learned to trust his instincts about potential threats, and his instincts were telling him that the humans were planning something, even though the Council's intelligence report suggested they were harmless primitives who posed no danger to anyone except themselves. The decision to nationalize the human mining operation was easy to justify because the asteroids contained rare elements that were crucial for galactic defense, and it would be irresponsible to leave such important resources in the hands of a species that might misuse them or fail to extract them efficiently enough to meet galactic needs. Vexahal assembled a fleet of 12 warships, which was massive overkill for dealing with the handful of primitive human vessels, but he wanted to make sure the demonstration was impressive enough that other young species would think twice before testing the limits of galactic authority. When the Zelkari fleet arrived at the human mining facility, Vexahal expected to see panic and immediate surrender, because that was how these situations always played out when established powers decided to remind newcomers about the reality of their situation. But instead he found a single human standing calmly on the command deck of what appeared to be a converted cargo hauler. Lieutenant Dan Cooper looked completely relaxed as he appeared on the main communication screen and politely requested that the hegemony vessels withdraw from human territory, citing some obscure section of the territorial agreements that Vexahal had never bothered to read, because who cared about legal technicalities when you had enough firepower to vaporize a small moon? Vexahal decided to end this farce quickly with a demonstration shot that would disable the human ship without killing the crew, because dead primitives could not spread the word about what happened to species that overestimated their importance in galactic affairs. The plasma cannon charged and fired, and Vexahal watched with satisfaction as the brilliant energy beam streaked toward the human vessel, but instead of the expected explosion, the blast simply vanished against some kind of energy barrier that should not have existed on such a primitive ship. Before Vexahal could process what he had just seen, the human cargo hauler began to change as hidden panels slid open to reveal weapon arrays and defensive systems that looked like nothing he had ever encountered before, and suddenly, Cooper's calm voice was cutting through the shocked silence on the communication channels. Cooper explained that the hegemony vessels had 30 seconds to power down their weapons and prepare to be boarded for inspection, and if they chose to resist, they would be disabled and taken by force, but either way, they would be leaving human space immediately and permanently. Vexel's response was to order all ships to open fire simultaneously because no primitive species could possibly have developed technology capable of standing against the combined firepower of the hegemony battle group, but the humans had apparently not read the same tactical manuals that Vexahal had studied for decades. The human ship moved through the Zalkari formation like it was dancing, and every time one of Vexahal's vessels tried to target it, the humans seemed to know exactly where the shot was going to be and were already somewhere else by the time the weapon fired, while their own return fire struck with surgical precision that disabled weapon systems and engines without destroying the ships. Within 10 minutes, the entire hegemony squadron was floating helplessly in space with their crews unharmed but their vessels completely neutralized, and Vexahal found himself listening to Admiral Scott Parker's voice as it broadcast across every communication channel in the sector. Admiral Parker's message was simple and direct and terrifying because he spoke like someone who had absolute confidence in his ability to back up every word he said, and what he said was that humanity was updating the territorial boundaries and defense protocols for this sector, and any future violations would be met with increasingly severe responses. The engagement had been broadcast live across the galactic communication networks, and Vexahal knew that every species in the galaxy had just watched a single human vessel systematically dismantle a hegemony battle group without breaking a sweat, which meant that everything everyone thought they knew about humanity had just been proven completely wrong. Ambassador Zekthara appeared on the emergency communication channel looking like he had just watched his entire worldview collapse in real time and demanding to know how the humans had developed such advanced technology so quickly when all the intelligence reports indicated they were barely capable of building functional spacecraft. And Cooper answered the question with a smile that made Vexahal's blood run cold, because it was the smile of someone who had been playing a game that everyone else thought was serious while he knew the real game had not even started yet. Cooper explained that humans had spent the last 8 months studying galactic technology and military tactics and had found them disappointingly predictable because every species seemed to fight the same way, using the same strategies that had worked for them for thousands of years, without considering that a newcomer might approach warfare from a completely different perspective. The humans had not been trying to build ships that were as good as galactic standard vessels, because that would have been pointless since they would always be outnumbered, but instead they had focused on building ships that could outthink and outmaneuver any conventional fleet by using tactics that no galactic military had ever encountered before. Vexel realized with growing horror that the humans had used the time everyone thought they were learning their place to instead study every aspect of galactic civilization and identify every weakness and exploit every assumption that the established powers had made about how conflicts would be resolved. The worst part was that this had only been a demonstration using outdated human technology, because Admiral Parker made it clear that this was not humanity's main fleet, but just a single patrol vessel equipped with defensive systems that were already being replaced with more advanced designs. As his disabled ships were towed back to hegemony space by human rescue vessels, Vexahal understood that the galaxy had just discovered that the primitive species they had been condescending to for the past 8 months was not primitive at all, but had been playing a game that was several moves ahead of everyone else. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened just 6 hours after the Zalkari incident, and representatives from 47 member species filled the Great Chamber with a level of panic that had not been seen since the last major galactic war 3 centuries ago, because the video footage of a single human vessel destroying an entire hegemony battle group had shattered every assumption about the balance of power in known. Space Ambassador Zekthara stood before the assembled delegates looking like he had aged decades in the past few hours as he presented intelligence reports that painted a picture so disturbing that several representatives demanded he repeat sections because they could not believe what they were hearing. The human mining operation had been a complete deception designed to hide the largest military build-up in recorded galactic history, and reconnaissance drones had finally managed to penetrate the outer edges of the human solar system, where they discovered massive shipyard facilities that should have been impossible for such a young species to construct. Dr. Ylandra, the Council's chief military analyst, took the podium with hands that trembled slightly as she explained that conservative estimates suggested humanity had built over 3,000 combat vessels in the 8 months since first contact, which was a construction rate that exceeded the combined output of the 5 largest galactic shipyards. But the truly terrifying part was not the number of ships, but the technology they incorporated, because somehow the humans had taken defensive systems designed by the Corithian Empire and power plants developed by the Nexari Collective and weapon arrays perfected by the Mordic clan, and had improved every single component beyond the specifications of the original designer's intelligence operative Kekstar had been monitoring human communications since the first day of contact, and what he had discovered made the military buildup seem almost trivial by comparison, because the humans were not just copying alien technology but were fundamentally reimagining how it could be used. The energy shields that had effortlessly absorbed Zelkari plasma fire were based on Corithian defensive matrices, but the humans had figured out how to make them adaptive so they could automatically adjust their frequency and intensity to counter any type of weapon that was fired at them. The weapon systems that had disabled the hegemony ships were derived from Mordic particle accelerators, but the humans had somehow made them precise enough to target individual components without causing collateral damage, which required a level of targeting sophistication that no galactic military had ever achieved. Even more disturbing was the intelligence indicating that the fleet around Jupiter was not humanity's main force but was actually their training squadron, where new crews learned how to operate the hybrid technology that combined the best elements from multiple alien civilizations into something that was greater than the sum of its parts. The main human fleet was still under construction in facilities that had been hidden so effectively that the Council's most advanced sensor networks could not locate them, despite knowing roughly where to look, because humans had apparently developed stealth technology that made their installations invisible to every known detection method. Representative Korthful from the Nexari Collective demanded to know how a species that had only achieved faster than light travel 8 months ago could possibly have developed such advanced capabilities so quickly when it had taken his people centuries to perfect much simpler technologies. The answer came from Dr. Ylandra, who had spent her career studying military development patterns across different species and had never seen anything like what the humans had accomplished, because they approached technological advancement in a way that no other galactic civilization had ever attempted, instead of focusing on perfecting individual technologies like every other species. Humans seemed to specialize in taking existing systems and combining them in ways that created entirely new capabilities, which meant they could achieve in months what would normally take other species decades or centuries. The humans had also demonstrated an understanding of galactic military doctrine that was both comprehensive and terrifying, because they had clearly studied how every major species fought and had developed specific counters for each approach, which meant they had been planning for conflict from the very beginning. Ambassador Zekthara presented recordings of Captain Morrison's communications during the first contact period, and the assembled delegates listened in growing horror as they realized that every question the humans had asked and every piece of information they had requested had been part of a systematic intelligence gathering operation. The humans had not been naive primitives seeking guidance from their galactic betters, but had been professional intelligence officers conducting a thorough assessment of potential threats while projecting an image of harmless incompetence that had fooled everyone completely. When Captain Morrison appeared on the main communication screen to address the Council, his demeanor was completely different from the humble explorer who had arrived 8 months ago, because now He spoke with the confidence of someone who held all the advantages in a negotiation. Morrison explained that humanity had no desire for conquest or territorial expansion beyond their own solar system, but would defend themselves against any threat with whatever force was necessary, and suggested that all member species update their threat assessment protocols to reflect the new reality of human capabilities. The implications of Morrison's statement hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow, because he was essentially declaring that humanity considered itself equal to any galactic power and was prepared to prove that claim through military action if necessary. Representative Gicksmith from the Mordek clan stood up and announced that his people would volunteer to resolve this threat before it could destabilize galactic civilization, and several other military powers voiced their agreement because they believed that united action could overwhelm even advanced human technology. But Dr. Yolandra S. final intelligence report destroyed any hope that conventional military action could solve the problem, because human defensive preparations extended far beyond their solar system and included automated weapon platforms and sensor networks that had been secretly deployed throughout this entire sector of space. The humans had not just been building a fleet, but had been preparing for a war that they intended to fight on their own terms, using strategies and technologies that no galactic military was equipped to counter. And the worst part was that they had accomplished all of this while maintaining the pretense of being grateful newcomers who were happy to accept whatever scraps the Council was willing to offer them. Warlord Gicksmith had built his reputation through 3,000 years of conquest, and had never encountered an enemy that could stand against the full might of the Mordek clan, which was why he volunteered to lead the largest military operation in galactic history when the Council decided that the human problem needed to be resolved permanently before it could spread to other young species. The Mordek war fleet that assembled in the Kepler system represented more firepower than had ever been concentrated in one place before, with 15,000 vessels carrying weapons capable of sterilizing entire star systems, and Gicksmith was confident that even the most advanced human technology could not stand against such overwhelming force. The human response seemed almost insulting when Admiral Lisa Grant arrived with just 50 ships that looked like slightly improved versions of the vessel that had humiliated the Zelkari fleet, and to most observers it appeared that humanity was either completely insane or had developed such advanced technology that they believed 50 ships could defeat 15,000. Gicksmith had studied the recordings of the Zelkari engagement and had developed tactics specifically designed to counter human advantages by using massive coordinated strikes that would overwhelm their defensive systems through sheer volume of fire, while planetary bombardment weapons charged in the background to deliver killing blows that no shield could absorb. The battle began exactly as Gicksmith had planned, with thousands of ships attacking from multiple vectors while maintaining formations that would prevent the humans from using their superior maneuverability to isolate individual targets. But something went wrong almost immediately, because the human ships did not behave like any military force he had ever encountered. Instead of trying to break through Mordek lines or retreat to a defensive position, Admiral Grant's ships began what could only be described as a dance through the enemy formation, with movements so precisely coordinated that they seemed to be controlled by a single intelligence rather than 50 separate commanders. Every time Mordek weapons locked onto a human target, the ship in question seemed to know exactly when and where the shot would be fired, and was already moving to a position where the attack would miss, while simultaneously positioning itself to strike back at the most vulnerable components of the attacking vessel. Gicksmith realized with growing alarm that the humans were not just outmaneuvering his fleet, but were systematically mapping every ship and weapon system and crew position through some kind of real-time intelligence network that allowed them to predict and counter every attack before it could be completed. The human weapons fired with a precision that should have been impossible during such a chaotic engagement, because each shot struck exactly where it would cause maximum disruption without destroying the target vessel, which meant the humans were somehow processing tactical information faster than Mordek computers could generate targeting solutions. Dr. Kevin Walsh had designed the human fleet integration Systems based on principles that no galactic military had ever considered, because while other species focused on building more powerful individual weapons, humans had developed network systems where every ship functioned as both a sensor platform and a processing node in a distributed intelligence network. Each human vessel was constantly sharing targeting data and tactical analysis with every other ship in the fleet, which meant that Admiral Grant was not commanding 50 separate vessels, but was directing a single organism that could think and react faster than any conventional military formation the Mordic had brought overwhelming firepower to the engagement. But firepower was useless if you could not hit your targets, and the human ships moved through the battlefield like they could see several seconds into the future and position themselves accordingly. Gisham ordered his planetary bombardment weapons to target the human fleet directly, even though firing such massive weapons into a chaotic battle would likely destroy many of his own ships, because he was becoming desperate as he watched his supposedly invincible war fleet being systematically dismantled by an enemy that should not have been able to survive the first 5 minutes of combat. But the human response to the bombardment weapons was even more terrifying than their tactical superiority, because instead of retreating or trying to avoid the massive energy beams, Admiral Grant's ships moved to intercept them using some kind of technology that absorbed the destructive force and redirected it back at the Mordic fleet. The energy that should have vaporized human ships instead struck Mordic vessels with their own weapons turned against them. And Gixmuth watched in horror as his most powerful weapons became the instruments of his own defeat. 3 hours after the engagement began, the Mordic war fleet had been completely neutralized, with every vessel disabled and drifting helplessly in space, while their crews remained unharmed but thoroughly humiliated by an enemy that had treated the largest military force in galactic history like a training exercise. Admiral Grant's voice cut through the stunned silence on the communication channels as she addressed Warlord Gixmuth directly with words that would haunt him for the rest of his extremely long life. Grant explained that Mordic crews would be provided with medical treatment for their injuries and returned to their home worlds unharmed, while their ships would be returned after human engineers completed technical evaluations of their systems, which was a polite way of saying that humans intended to study and improve upon every piece of Mordic military technology. Most humiliating part was Grant's suggestion that Gixmuth reconsider his approach to diplomacy, because humanity preferred peaceful solutions to conflicts but was prepared to demonstrate their military capabilities as often as necessary until other species learned to respect human sovereignty. News of the Mordic defeat spread across the galaxy within hours, and every military leader in known space suddenly understood that the balance of power had shifted permanently, because if the mighty Mordic clan could be defeated so easily, then no conventional military force could stand against human technology. But the truly terrifying revelation came when intelligence analysis of the engagement showed that the human fleet had been operating at only a fraction of its full capability and had deliberately avoided using their most advanced weapons in order to preserve Mordic lives, which meant that what the galaxy had witnessed was not humanity's full military potential, but just a demonstration of their restraint. The message was clear to anyone intelligent enough to understand it, because if humans could defeat the largest war fleet in galactic history while holding back their most devastating capabilities, then attempting to fight them was not just futile but suicidal, and the only rational response was to find a way to coexist peacefully with this terrifying new power that had emerged from the primitive backwater that everyone had dismissed as irrelevant. 6 months after the Mordic engagement, the Galactic Council convened for what many representatives believed would be their final session as an independent governing body, because humanity had requested formal recognition as a sovereign member species with full territorial rights, and given their demonstrated military superiority, few delegates expected to have any real choice in the matter. Ambassador Carl Williams led the human delegation into the Great Chamber, and the assembled representatives watched him with the kind of nervous attention usually reserved for natural disasters or other forces of nature that could not be reasoned with or controlled. But Williams carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone what shocked the delegates was that Williams did not demand submission or impose human hegemony over galactic civilization, but instead presented a proposal that was so unexpected that several representatives asked him to repeat sections because they could not believe what they were hearing. Humanity wanted to share their technological advances with all member species and establish joint research initiatives that would benefit everyone while creating a collective defense network that would protect every civilization from external threats, whether they came from unknown regions of space or from conflicts between existing powers. Dr. Patricia Moore took the podium to explain the reasoning behind the proposal, and her words challenged every assumption that galactic civilization had operated under for thousands of years, because she argued that competition between species was fundamentally wasteful when cooperation could achieve so much more. Moore explained that humanity's rapid technological advancement had not come from superior intelligence or natural talent, but from their approach to problem solving, which focused on integration and improvement rather than developing completely new technologies from scratch. While galactic species had spent millennia perfecting individual technologies in isolation, humans excelled at combining and enhancing existing systems by taking the best elements from multiple civilizations and creating something greater than the sum of its parts. The demonstration that followed changed everything as ships from 12 different species, equipped with human-designed integration systems, performed maneuvers that individual fleets had never achieved because the hybrid technology allowed them to share sensor data and coordinate actions in real Timicorthian shields, powered by Nixari energy systems and guided by Vortanian sensors, created defensive capabilities that made traditional warfare obsolete, while Mordek weapons integrated with human targeting systems could strike with precision that eliminated the need for massive destructive force. Commander Rick Davis explained that humanity's strategic vision extended far beyond military applications because the same integration principles that had revolutionized space combat could be applied to scientific research and resource management and social development across all member species. The automated manufacturing systems that had allowed humans to build thousands of ships in months could be adapted to produce medical supplies or agricultural equipment or educational materials for any species that needed them, while human computer networks could process research data and solve problems that individual civilizations had struggled with for centuries. But the most revolutionary aspect of the human proposal was the idea that galactic civilization should be organized around cooperation rather than competition, because Williams argued that the greatest threats facing all species came from external forces that could only be defeated through united action. The galaxy was vast and largely unexplored, and there were certainly other intelligent species out there who might not be as interested in peaceful coexistence as humans claimed to be, which meant that internal conflicts between council members were not just wasteful but potentially suicidal if they weakened galactic defenses. Williams presented evidence that human exploration missions had already detected signs of advanced civilizations in distant regions of space, and some of these civilizations appeared to have military capabilities that would challenge even the combined forces of the current council members. The choice facing galactic civilization was simple, according to Williams, because they could continue the old system of competition and territorial disputes and individual advancement, or they could embrace the human vision of collective progress and mutual defense and shared prosperity. Dr. Moore concluded the presentation by explaining that human integration technology was already being tested on volunteer crews from multiple species, and the results exceeded all projections, because diverse perspectives and different approaches to problem solving created innovations that no single species could achieve alone. The vote was unanimous, but not because the delegates were afraid of human military power, but because the demonstration had shown them possibilities that they had never imagined, and for the first time in galactic history, a species had been invited to lead not through conquest, but through the promise of what they could build together. In the years that followed, human-guided research initiatives solved problems that had plagued the galaxy for millennia, while the collective defense network prevented conflicts before they could escalate into wars, and the integration of different species capabilities created technologies that revolutionized every aspect of galactic civilization. The member species began to understand that their initial assessment of humanity had been completely wrong, because humans were not just getting started when they achieved faster than light travel or when they revealed their hidden military capabilities, but when they decided that the galaxy's future would be built on cooperation rather than competition. Ambassador Williams concluded the historic session with words that would be remembered across the galaxy for generations, as he explained that humanity had learned through thousands of years of conflict on their homeworld that the only way to truly solve the challenges facing any civilization was to work together rather than against each other. The greatest strength of any species was not their individual power or their advanced technology or their military might, but their ability to inspire others to reach beyond what they thought was possible and to create something better than what had existed before, because that was how civilizations truly advanced and how the future was built. What the galaxy discovered was that humanity's most dangerous weapon was not their ships or their shields or their integration networks, but their absolute belief that cooperation was always possible and that every problem could be solved if enough intelligent beings worked together to find the solution and refused to give up until they succeeded.